Hey, families, your sister Jocelyn here, and welcome to another episode of Faith on the Journey. If this is your first time tuning in, we welcome you. We are so glad that you are here and want you to know that we're committed to helping you strengthen your faith, heal your heart, and discover a sense of community. And we do so through a variety of ways by connecting you with a team of Christian counselors and also offering trauma healing trainings across the country. You can learn about these resources and so much more by visiting our website at faithonthejourney.org. Again, that is faithonthejourney.org. So I'm very excited to welcome to the show an awesome woman of God, Debbie Ausborn, who is an experienced social worker turned lawyer who has dedicated over 4 years working with youth serving organizations. But her work with youth go beyond just working as a lawyer and a social worker. And you're going to learn about this today and her experience for raising other people's children. So we're so excited to have you here on the show. Welcome, Debbie.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. Thank you for accepting my invitation. And I would love for you just to start off with a little bit about your background. What got you interested in working in this field?
Well, my parents were always involved with young people through our church and through various ministries. At the time, way back then, they called them at-risk kids, and so I just grew up with a family that was always working with kids who were right on the edge and right on the margin. And then my mom got a job with our local juvenile detention center, and I did a lot of volunteer work there, and then worked for a while as a caseworker with the juvenile court outside Atlanta. And I burned out. I got tired of dipping out the ocean with a teaspoon and went to law school. And but just sort of never lost the tug for working with kids who have been through more than they should have been through.
Yeah. Oh, and I would love to get to that topic in just a minute in terms of what children are going through and what you've seen. But before I do, I would love for you to share a little bit about your faith. I understand that that's an important part of your life. When did you become a believer and what role did it play as you started working with children?
Well, I was raised in a Christian family, so my conversion experience dates back to age 6. And so I honestly don't remember a time before that when I didn't believe, but I do remember the specific time when I recognized my failings and the need to turn to God in order to deal with the sin and just sort of the brokenness that's part of the human condition. And I've never lost that in the years since. I have always managed to hang on to that belief. And my work with I'm a lawyer now. That's how I make my living. But my work with in law and with social work and kids, I work mostly with non Christians. So I almost have two different divides to my life. There's my professional life, which is mostly non Christian. I have a good camaraderie with a lot of Christian lawyers, but most of my ministry throughout my life has just been with non-Christians who don't really get me or understand where I'm coming from.
That's okay. We're supposed to get out there and
Yes,
work with
yes.
people and shed our light, and that's exactly what you're doing. And the work that you do, it sounds like it's personal, and I would like to get into that because you have the background of being a social, like in the social work field, that is, and then the law degree, and it has you working around youth. And so, can you kind of tie all of that together in terms of how that came to be?
Well, as I said, with my parents, I grew up working with at-risk kids, and I grew up in a working lower middle class income level, and I didn't suffer any significant trauma growing up. We were always sort of kind of poor, and my parents though had a stable marriage and a stable family, but outside that immediate family, I saw a lot of just a lot of problems, a lot of trauma in our extended family. It was alcohol, and then a lot of the younger folks gave into alcohol and drug addiction. So I was always standing on the side watching that. And then when I became a caseworker and started working with the kids, I saw that they just didn't have the family resources that I had, and they were suffering a lot of trauma. And I've never been able to look aside and not see that now.
Mhm. And there's a lot, unfortunately, that you do see in those roles, certain things that really just break you. And I'm curious, as to you witness certain things that were really difficult to see, how did you process that? How did it impact you? And what did you do with those emotions?
Well, I came across it in a couple of different ways. One was as a caseworker, but as I said, that I just got tired of not having the resources. So when I became a moved into the legal field, I actually spent some time as a prosecutor of crimes against children. So I obviously saw a lot of trauma and brokenness then. And then during that same period of time, I signed up to be a foster parent, and I worked both. Well, start to say both. I worked as a an emergency short-term placement, as a respite family, working on weekends connected to specific long-term placements, and then eventually I moved into a long-term placement myself. So I encountered all of those the brokenness and the trauma in different aspects of it. As a prosecutor, I had the tools that I needed to do part of it. You know, I could put the bad guy in jail, but law enforcement doesn't do therapy. And I've never been a therapist.
The trauma healing has actually given us an opportunity to truly share some of the pain that we've gone through that has caused us to be in this place.
I think the use of scripture and truth, along with stories that are relatable, begin to start the dialogue for women to be able to recognize and be able to connect the fact that he is in their circumstances with whatever situation.
With this trauma healing groups, we've been able to see people shed their masks and really just open up and share things that they too didn't even realize. And
the transformation from the participants really included just being able to bring their heart to Jesus.
What's amazing is some of them came with particular hurts or wounds that they wanted to share.
It allowed me to be free with some deep-rooted things that I never spoke, and know that it was all right for me to speak them.
Being able to recognize their emotions from the very start.
There was no judgment. It more or less said that this is okay, that this is what's needed.
Just the power from being in the room with other women, recognizing that it's okay to share our hurts. It's good to be able to recognize what is a safe place and to be able to take all of those hurts to the cross.
They realized it's something different that they were there to share. And they found healing in ways that they didn't expect.
But once I got to that place of understanding how this kind of really does work, I had a moment of complete release. In that release, I was able to truly open up, even if it wasn't to anyone but to me and God, but to truly open up about some of the things that I had been suppressing or trying to suppress for years.
Every little bit about it is a soft brushstroke that all combines to make just a really beautiful picture. For them to be able to see the different too and have some of the tools that the Trauma Healing Institute implements are very helpful.
I'm always surprised how God is using this. So it's a good place to be.
In this field, in terms of the work in wanting to do advocacy, and as an attorney, you were able to do that in a sense by putting the bad guys away for children. But eventually you got to a point where you said you wanted to write a book. on raising other people's children. And I'm curious as to what led to that and what's the focus of the book and what are some lessons that you talk about in it?
Well, what led to the book is a friend of mine kept nagging me until finally I gave in to write the book. But the focus of it also was one of my long-term foster placements had hit a snag, and my husband and I inherited that child's child. So we had a foster grandchild, I guess you would say. And trauma can be, it's not always, but it can be generational. And my foster kid had just not been able to get past enough of the trauma and had repeated a lot of the problems and mistakes, and had created a very chaotic family life for our grandchild. So we found ourselves dealing with really a lot of trauma, both between the chaotic home life, the family members involved, and this particular child's sensitivities. And my husband and I just found ourselves at odds because his attitude was, I've raised 5 kids, and understand I've never had biological kids. So after being a foster parent, I married a man with 5 kids, and the older kids were out of the house. There were still 2 at home. And he kept saying, I've raised 5 kids. And I kept saying, well, but not with this degree of trauma. You haven't. And so part of my writing the book was, it was sort of towards the end of that placement. It was during COVID. And my motivation was to distill all the things that I wish I had said to my husband before the child came into our care. I don't know if it would have made our lives easier, but I think it certainly would have made our communications easier. And part of the problem was I'd been doing it for so long, I just sort of instinctively did things and figured everybody else knew it by now. And so I had to go to the trouble of pulling it out and laying it out in a logical format for someone who had never faced this kind of thing before.
Yeah, and you're right. Like sometimes we can assume that other people understand, but those who have not worked in the field before, haven't been exposed to children who have been dealing with trauma, it is different. It does impact them, and those things need to be considered. And so, let's talk about some of the lessons that you speak to in your book, of the things you wish that your husband knew before you took in the foster child.
Well, I think the first lesson that we as adults working with either foster kids or step kids, quite frankly, is to understand that we are not the people who are supposed to be in these kids' lives. From the kids' perspective, they are supposed to be with an intact biological family. And anything else is just not quite right. And their world is out of kilter. And it's a constant balancing act trying to get back in kilter or with a stable center when you don't have the people who are supposed to be there. And I began to understand that with my foster kids. It doesn't really matter how nice I am or how wonderful I am. I'm not the person who's supposed to be there. So by the time I married my husband and inherited the 5 kids, the 2 younger ones I was helping parent because he had custody, I understood that. And the story I started with in my book was a time when my husband's ex-wife asked for custody of the kids, and we were trying to figure out what our youngest son wanted, and he was not going to say anything. He didn't want to take sides, wasn't going to say anything that sounded like taking sides. And we weren't asking him to take sides. We just didn't want to go down a particular route if he was completely opposed to the way that we wanted to go with it. And finally, my husband said, well, let me ask it this way. If you had a magic wand, what would your life look like? And this kid, he didn't hesitate. He said, well, if I had a magic wand, you and mom would be back together. And then he looked over at me very concerned and said, "Well, no insult, Debbie. You and the dogs would be right next door." And by then I understand this child and I had bonded. I was 3 years into this marriage and everything was going well. We had a solid relationship and I wasn't hurt or offended. I understood if the world worked the way it's supposed to, I wouldn't know any of my kids. I would, and from their perspective, I would be the kind lady next door who let them pet the dogs and gave them cookies. Um, but I wouldn't be part of their family. So that's the first thing that we have to recognize. I think the second thing we have to recognize is that divorce actually is traumatic for kids. We tend to normalize that because it's so common and because kids are so resilient, and we tend to think, oh, they'll be fine. Maybe, maybe not. And we have to be very careful when we come into that relationship or a foster care relationship and just understand that these kids have suffered trauma. The second thing I would say that we have to understand is that trauma changes kids. It does. The neuroscience is new on this. I'm not quite in the body remembers things school of thought because there's a whole lot more theory right now than scientific proof. However, there's no doubt that it does set up. The analogy I use is it sets up a situation for kids like a computer that's running this really resource heavy program in the background, and it's taking up all the resources. And what you get on the program at the front that you're trying to work on is glitchy and slow and obnoxious and annoying and very frustrating. And that's what we get with our kids. The back of their brain is still trying to process the trauma that they went through. They're still trying to use they're still viewing current events through that past memories. And so what we get at the front is annoying and glitchy and incredibly frustrating. The third thing I would say is that our kids are not victims. They have been through a lot. They have been through things that kids should not go through, but they are not perpetual victims. We cannot let that victim status define their life. And that is incredibly hard in today's culture when being a victim has currency. And as one of my foster kids said one time, I can count up victim points like everybody else. And we can. And actually, our kids are encouraged to. The more victim points they get, the more they can trade in. One of my kids said to me one time, I don't have to study for school. I can write a killer essay about my mom was a drug addict and my dad deserted us, and now I'm living with these old people who don't understand me. And so, that was the plan to count up victim points and use that to substitute for good grades. It didn't work out, but somewhere along the line, that kid had been taught that that's what you do.
Wow. Yeah, yeah, and I'm glad that that's something that you are doing a counter narrative to that, because seeing yourself as a victim the entire life does not serve you well. You're a survivor and you've gone through tremendous ordeals, and there's healing and work that needs to be done, and it needs to be acknowledged, but it doesn't define you. And so I appreciate you sharing that. And for a parent right now, whether it's a step parent or a bonus parent, as some might like to call it, or if you're fostering a child and you witness that they've gone through a lot of trauma, and so it is causing a lot to happen in the house, as you described, in terms of maybe some chaos, maybe some things that you just don't know how to deal with, and you're struggling right now. What words of advice would you offer them?
First thing I would say is get professional help. you need mental health counseling. A lot of times our kids have all of these huge emotions that they just don't know how to deal with, and they need mental health help in figuring out how to name the emotions, how to give themselves a vocabulary to describe it, and how to move things from that primal level to the rational, logical level of their brain so that they can deal with it. The second thing I would say is that we have to find a way to give them unconditional love, unconditional acceptance with healthy boundaries. And that is very, very hard to do because sometimes we err on the boundaries and say if this happens, then I don't, and we give off the impression that you're a terrible person and I don't love you anymore. And on the other hand, it's too easy to flip back to the other side and say, well, because I love you, because I care about you, because I accept you, then I'll let you slide this time. And sometimes that works, but if you do that too often, then all you're doing is letting the kid learn how to trade on their victimhood. And so we have to learn how to say, as one experienced foster parent said one time in a meeting I was in, said, we have to learn how to say to our kids, I am so very sorry this happened to you. I really wish it hadn't, but it did, and we'll figure out how to move forward. And in the meantime, the dishes need to be done. No, no. We care, we're empathetic, but life goes on, and there is a small task that you can do.
Yeah, I love that. And it's so funny you shared that because I actually attended a workshop yesterday and we were talking about helping anyone who's gone through trauma and might be at a place where they might not be functioning at a certain level because of all the things that they've gone through. You can still look at what are some small steps that they can take for developing agency, right? To move forward. You don't expect from them to go to A to Z all of a sudden, considering what they have gone through, but there are certain things that they can do to begin to move forward and being patient and walking with them. But going back to what you were talking about in terms of possibly an enabling, if you will, someone who has experienced that where you do everything for them because you want to help. Someone used an example that I just love. They talked about how if you had a magical ATM machine where anytime this person came up to it and they wanted money, they could just take it out and it's just magically gives them money. Would you ever stop taking out money even when you don't need it? You would just go to the ATM machine to take out money nonstop, and I think, when we think about children or even adults for that matter, in a case like that, if it's free money or if we're willing to do stuff for people without any like boundaries around that, then people are going to continue to use up just because it's there. But at some point, we have to say, this is out of order. Like money really doesn't grow on trees. Like this is not reality here. And so having those boundaries when you say no, this is out of order is important to have to help others to grow so they don't become dependent on this, in this case, magical ATM.
Well, and the other thing about the magical ATM is if you never have to work for anything, then you never develop self-esteem. And
Hmm.
that's one of the things that we spent how many decades trying to give kids self-esteem by building them up, by saying things, by affirming them, by not letting them lose at sports, by having participation trophies, by all of those things. And guess what? The science is in. It does not work. It actually makes things worse. The only way that kids get self-esteem is by accomplishing something. And the only way they accomplish something is by failing and getting back up and trying something else. We cannot give our kids self-esteem the way we can give them broccoli.
Right. Right. That's so true. That's so true. It's a difference between positive stress, which is what you're describing in terms of like, okay, you lost a sports game, or yes, I know you don't want to clean the house, but you need to do it. Like that's positive stress. Do your homework, study hard for a class, and versus toxic stress, which is what they went through when they experienced trauma. That's different, right? But positive stress is something that we need to help them to be able to adjust to and say, I'm here. I know
Right.
it's hard, but you're capable. But I'm going to be patient with you along the way.
That's right. We will walk this together, and I have confidence that you can make it. But
Hmm.
you have to do this. I cannot do this for you. This part you have to do. And I
Exactly.
will be in your cheering section. I will help you, but you have to take the steps.
You do. You do. I heard someone say at this workshop, I can't breathe for you. Like there's certain things I cannot do for you, And so when it comes to teaching them, supporting them through the process, being a cheerleader, but letting them know what you believe they're capable of, even if they don't believe it themselves yet, is important because hopefully eventually in that loving environment, they'll begin to believe, they'll begin to know that they're capable of much more than what the world might have said or what they have experienced in the past. And um, so this is some amazing things that you talk about in your work. And I just wanted to ask if there's any final words of advice that you offer our listeners today around this subject, what would that be?
I would say that understand that commitment is stronger than love is one of the ways I phrase it. That if you're going to go in working with these kids, don't expect to love them right away. Don't expect to even like them right away. but but you have to be willing to make a commitment to keep trying. Now, if they're going to overstep boundaries, drug addiction is something that I personally just can't. I just don't have the resources to deal with it. So that's always been a deal breaker for me. But there are other things that I can handle that other people can't. Runaways. Some people just get tired of kids who run away. That doesn't faze me at all. I've been through that. So you just have to establish what your personal individual boundaries are. But beyond those healthy boundaries, you have to stick with the kids as they do the two-step forward, one step back. And then the last thing I would say is that it really doesn't require any Mother Teresa like aspects. This is kind of one of the things that I'm most uncomfortable with is when people treat me or other current or former foster parents as though we're saints. I am not. And I will tell you that if a left brained, empathy challenged lawyer can develop a good relationship with traumatized kids, then anyone can.
That's really encouraging. And I
Yes.
did wanna ask one other follow-up question now that I think about it, because the end of the story, how did things turn around in terms of with your foster children, like, or foster child? Is there any follow-up to that?
Well, it's different ones, some of them were short-term placements that I lost track of. There were two that were long-term who've become part of my family. And, my 3, my husband's 3 oldest kids are actually his stepkids, so there were some challenges there. And I think our story is probably encouraging for folks in that 2 of them we don't have a good relationship with. They have pulled away, and there's nothing we can do. I keep the doors open. We send notes and stuff. That they know where we are whenever they are willing to come back. But you just have to take that risk. With the other 5, we have incredibly close, incredibly strong relationships, and 7 kids and 10 grandkids. We managed to keep ourselves busy with the ones that we do have good relationships with. And you stick with your boundaries, and you keep the doors open, and you love them and pray for them.
That's it. Yeah. And sometimes I appreciate your honesty around that because sometimes it doesn't necessarily work out where they're willing to receive, ready to receive the love, the care. They choose their own path and you wish them well.
Right.
You pray for them. There's only so much
Right.
you can do.
Right,
right?
right,
But there's so much blessings in the beautiful five who are still really close to you.
right. And even the others, they changed me in ways that I wouldn't trade. I am much more compassionate. I am much more empathetic. I am much more patient. God will teach you patience whether you want it or not. And they're all incredible kids, and I'm blessed to have known them for the time that I was able to know them. So there are never any guarantees with kids, biological kids or foster kids or adopted kids or step kids. It's the human condition, and everybody has agency, and everybody makes their own decisions, and you do the best you can, and you forgive yourself for your mistakes, and you keep trying.
Amen to that. That's good, Debbie. Thank you so much. And could you share how people can get in touch with you and grab a copy of your book?
Yes, if you can go to debbieausburn.com is my website. And from there are links to, you can find the book on Amazon, or you can order it from me either there at debbieausburn.com or raisingotherpeopleschildren.com it is a direct link to it. But the debbieausburn.com is going to be the central hub for everything.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Debbie, for being on the show. I really enjoyed our conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And I thank you all for tuning into today's broadcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, you know what to do. Please leave a 5-star review and share this episode with a friend. Also, remember that we do have Christian counseling resources available to you, and you can check those out on our website at faithonthejourney.org. So that's it for this week, family. Thank you for tuning in. And until next time, you keep your faith on the journey. I'll see you.